Welcome back to the deep dive. Wow, the stack of material you brought in today is it's something else. We've got political strategy documents, complex economic models, and official statements from both Tehran and Washington.
We do, and they all seem to point in one direction, one single scenario.
The second major conflict, what the analysts are just calling round two.
Exactly. And our job today is, well, it's pretty complex. We're not just looking at military stuff. We need to get into the political forces that are almost pulling everyone towards this.
So we're trying to understand why these documents suggest a war is not just possible, but maybe even required. And then what the models say will happen if it all goes wrong.
And right away, the sources hit you with this paradox that, honestly, it just makes your head spin.
Yeah, on one hand, you have Iran basically saying, all bets are off, we will respond with everything we have.
But on the other hand, the analysis here suggests the U.S. administration needs this crisis. I mean, structurally requires it for its own domestic success. It's wild.
It flips the whole script. War becomes a political tool, not a diplomatic failure.
And that entire paradox is built on the foundation of what happened last time, the June 2025 12-day conflict.
Operation Rising Lion.
Right. To really get the danger of round two, you have to go back to the one critical fact that was established in round one.
Which was that devastating attack. It took out top Iranian commanders, scientists, and hit their nuclear facilities hard. And at first, the U.S. claimed Israel did it alone.
They did, but that whole story just fell apart. It completely collapsed when President Trump admitted he was, and this is a direct quote, very much in charge of that initial Israeli attack.
He basically admitted he greenlighted the whole thing.
He did, and that was a huge political turning point.
I remember that. Secretary of State Marco Rubio had put his whole reputation on the line denying it. So the president's admission was, it was ironclad proof the U.S. was directly involved.
Precisely. And for Tehran, this was more than just an embarrassment. It was a legal and military game changer. People like Speaker Ghalibaf and Ambassador Iravani at the UN, they jumped on it immediately.
Demanding the U.S. accept the consequences.
The legal, political, and military consequences, yes. So round one didn't really end. It just set a new precedent. The U.S. took direct responsibility, and that changes all the rules for round two.
Okay, so that sets the stage. Let's pivot to Iran's position now. Because if round one established U.S. guilt, these sources suggest their plan for round two is, well, it's terrifyingly simple.
It is. Prior restraint is gone. It's off the table. That is the single loudest message coming from Tehran since June 2025.
They're all saying the same thing.
Unified. Any new fight would be stronger, more decisive, or without previous restraints. And they're not hiding it. They're openly saying they learned from their past mistakes.
And we have some pretty stark quotes here. Foreign Minister Arachi warned that new talks will not be like the previous ones. But the part that really stood out to me was his admission that the June war revealed our weak points and we addressed them.
That's so significant. It's not just bluster. It's a claim of strategic improvement. You take that statement, that they've fixed their vulnerabilities, and you pair it with the rhetoric from the IRGC.
Then the picture gets very clear.
Undeniably. The IRGC spokesman Ali Mohammed Naini's quote is just chilling.
If Israel attacks again, Tehran will have no red lines.
And that, right there, that's the whole new strategy in one sentence. It's a formal declaration that the old rules, the sort of proportional responses we saw before 2025, they're gone.
Commander Mohammed Pakpour promised a crushing response.
And highlighted preparations designed to make the next round much worse. So for you, listening right now, this means the unwritten rules of engagement that kind of held the region together, they're just extinct. We are looking at a direct path to total war.
And this brings us to what might be the most alarming part of this whole deep dive, the claim that this war is actually required for the administration's domestic political project to succeed.
The Unified Crisis Framework. This is the absolute core of the documents. They call it the Trump Chapter 11 thesis, Alpha 1.0.
Okay, let's break this down because the metaphor itself is pretty shocking. They're using corporate bankruptcy law to describe governing the United States.
That's the metaphor. The idea is that the U.S. government is insolvent, it's bankrupt, and in that situation, the president becomes the debtor in possession, or DIP.
The DIP, and in a real bankruptcy, the DIP gets special powers from a judge to restructure the company, right? Normal rules don't apply.
Exactly. And in this political version, the normal operating agreement that gets suspended is the Constitution. It's seen as getting in the way of the centralization of power.
So the end goal, which they call Alpha 2.0, the dominant success model, is just complete centralization of power.
Wait, so you're telling me the sources argue that crisis and chaos are actually the goal, not a bug, but a feature? It's the primary resource. The whole strategy depends on a perpetual predicate of crisis, a constant state of emergency. Because the moment things stabilize, the moment the country is solvent again.
The metaphor breaks down.
The metaphor breaks down, the Constitution comes back into force, and the president loses all that special DIP authority. From this viewpoint, stability is the single greatest threat to the entire project.
That reframes everything we've seen domestically. Actions that looked like chaos, what the sources call a controlled demolition, were actually steps to manufacture this crisis.
Right. And the sources point to three main examples of this. First, the 39-day government shutdown. That was like stopping payment to creditors. It's your proof of financial insolvency.
Then you have the Project 2025 and Schedule F purges. That looks like institutional insolvency. You're arguing the government is so broken you have to tear it down and get rid of all that institutional memory, the legacy costs.
And third, the constant legal battles over things like IEPA and SNAP. That's about testing the DIP's power to control the economy in an emergency, and it also creates more social friction. All of it just drives the domestic crisis score higher and higher.
But there's a problem with this strategy, right? The analysis points out a huge vulnerability.
A huge one. A manufactured domestic crisis is politically debatable. It's legally vulnerable. A court could just step in and say, nope, this isn't a real bankruptcy, and the whole thing comes crashing down.
So how does round two, the war, fix that problem?
It's the justification bridge. That's the term they use. It lets the president transition from that legally shaky debtor role to the unchallengeable role of wartime president.
And war trumps everything.
It's the ultimate justification. It silences political debate, it validates the centralized power, and it overrides most constitutional checks.
So the domestic chaos creates the political need for the war, and the war then validates the power grab you needed to deal with the domestic chaos.
That's the feedback loop. And the documents link them with numbers. The high domestic crisis score is directly tied to a high political necessity for a U.S. strike. And that domestic chaos, it becomes a permissive amplifier for an Israeli strike.
How permissive? What do they rate the chances of Israel attacking again?
The Israeli strike score, or ISL, is a perfect 10.0.
A 10. So,
Dear.
certain.
Certain. The argument is that the chaos and dysfunction in Washington creates a power vacuum that Israel feels it has to fill. The path to war is being paved as the only way to achieve their version of domestic success.
That is a deeply chilling thought.
Yeah.
That a foreign war could be engineered as a domestic necessity. So now we have to look at the risk. What happens if this essential war goes wrong?
You mean a sunk carrier, massive casualties, Iran being far more resilient than expected?
Yes. What happens then?
Well, the probability they assign to that failure is just staggering. The analysis puts the odds of the war going badly wrong at 80 to 90%.
Wait, 80 to 90%. That's almost a guarantee of failure? Why so high?
It's the collision of the two things we just talked about. First, you have the U.S. strategy, the dominance model, which basically demands nonstop escalation. It can't accept a setback.
And second,
that strategy is running straight into Iran, who the sources call a resilient adversary. They have asymmetric tools, hypersonic missiles, cyber, potential EMP capability, all designed specifically to hit U.S. weak spots.
okay, let's break down what that failure looks like. The sources say the economy is already in acute shock. They talk about layoffs on par with 2008, the shutdown costing nearly $100 billion. So what happens if a disastrous war gets thrown on top of that?
The model spits out an economic instability score that means simply total systemic failure. This isn't a recession, it's the entire financial system seizing up.
And the immediate triggers are
Oil prices going to unimaginable levels. Supply chains not just disrupted, but obliterated. We're talking at a complete breakdown in the flow of everything from food to medicine.
And somehow the forecast for society is even worse than the economic one. Again, 80 to 90% odds.
They use a very specific term for it, de facto balkanization.
Meaning, states just start acting like their own countries.
Pretty much. Blue states and red states would start running radically different economic and resource policies. The models predict regions hoarding resources, blocking shipments of food or fuel at their borders to provide for their own people first.
And the defiance of federal authority would go beyond policy.
Oh, absolutely. It becomes overt. States with opposition governors would just refuse to cooperate with the war effort. They could even, and the documents are explicit about this, recall their National Guard units.
Creating sanctuaries for war resistors.
Yeah.
I mean, that's just a few steps away from actual civil conflict.
It is. And while all that